Welcome to the very first episode of Heart of Gold. I'm your host, Jeff Winkler, and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast was created to shine a spotlight on nonprofits doing meaningful, life changing work. On the first of every month, we'll drop a new episode, about an hour long, where I'll sit down with the people behind these missions to hear what drives them, the impact they're making, and how you can get involved. You'll find links in the show notes to support each nonprofit with your time, your money, or both. In addition to that, every episode comes with a limited edition bracelet available at heartofgoldbracelets.com. That bracelet represents the nonprofit we feature, and 10% of every sale will go directly to that nonprofit. Plus, for this first episode, we're doing a little extra. First 100 people to buy a bracelet will also get a second one free to give away. It's our way of helping you spread the word and their mission even further. For creating coding careers, this will actually be one of these bracelets is what we will feature for them. If there's a nonprofit you care about deeply and you want to see featured on the show, I'd love to hear from you. So just send me an email at jeff@heartofgoldbracelets.com and tell me why their mission is so special to you. Today's guest is from an organization that's close to my heart. They're helping people learn how to code out in San Diego, California. And in doing so, they're helping individuals change the trajectory of their lives. It's not just about tech skills. It's about empowerment, transformation, and community impact that lasts. So with that, let's dive in. Welcome to the inaugural Heart of Gold podcast. This is the first one. I am happy to have Mike Roberts, who's the CEO of Creating Coding Careers, which is based in San Diego. Thanks for hopping on today, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun to be here.
Yeah.
Always good. Always good to chat.
This is podcast number 2 overall that Mike and I have been on the first episode of together, but we'll have to save that story for another day. So can you give us a high-level overview, and then we'll dive into more specifics about kind of how you started and some additional thoughts. But can you give us a high-level overview for everyone on what Creating Coding Careers is and does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to say that I am a technologist and I'm building the playbook for company-driven earn and learn pathways. What makes our program unique is all the students that are going through this experience with us are getting paid while they're learning, and there's always a job at the end of the opportunity. So for those that get into an apprenticeship program, it's an amazing deal. You know, because you went to a coding boot camp and then ran your own coding boot camp, that is the thing that stresses out most, if not all of the students, is like, when am I going to get a job? And we try and solve that right up front.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times when people attend coding boot camps, they're basically paying for a job and not necessarily paying to learn how to code.
100%. And I think that the transactional nature of that is really what I think a lot of people get when they go to a school for like a 4-year degree or like a computer science major. They're still exchanging, like, I'm paying you these dollars, and at the end of this, you're going to give me a piece of paper and it's going to give me a job. And I think a lot of higher ed, the folks that work in higher ed, are just like, we're training people to be great citizens. And it's like, no, you're not. So let's just be real. And with a coding bootcamp, it's a little bit more like straightforward, the transactional nature of it. But that is the transaction. People have an expectation that they go through the program. If they work hard, they're going to end up landing a well-paying job.
What is it about your process that's different that you're able to allow them to get a job versus maybe coding boot camps, which don't necessarily get everyone a job, right?
5 years ago when we switched to this model, was like, an apprenticeship is very unlike an internship, and that every time we talk about apprenticeship, there's always a full-time job into it. Like, it's part of the DNA of apprenticeship. So if we're doing apprenticeship right, that means that we've already talked to a company. They already have a long-term permanent position ready for someone, and they're just looking for a way to get maybe candidates that they couldn't get in front of before, or just people that are going to have really good attributes that might not have a pathway into that particular role. So I think from the very beginning, the thing that to me appealed when I started going down this route was, I don't have to worry about the whole like train and pray and hope this person goes out there and does a good job. Like, we know when we bring them in, we've got a company that's ready to go. And now it's just about getting them to the skill level where the company's like, great, let's go. And like, they're perfect where they are right now. We'll take it from there.
How do you, well, before we dive deeper too, I kind of want to dive into a misconception even that I had originally when we had first started talking about what you're going to do with this particular organization. What would you say is the difference between an internship and apprenticeship, like a fundamental level? Because I feel like people intermix the two and they think they mean the same thing.
Oh yeah, they're totally different. And I did this work for multiple years before I really understood, I absorbed the fact that they are so vastly different. I think an analogy that I often use that I think people that resonates with folks are think about dating, right? That would be like an internship is like dating and an apprenticeship is like marriage, right? And so you've been married. So I think you understand there's like a significant investment that you're making, right? It's a much longer commitment that you're making. You are from the very beginning, you're much more clear about like what your expectations are in each of those types of relationships. And one really is like testing it out, testing the waters, figuring out, like getting to know. And the other is much more like, okay, we are bonded, and this is something that we're moving forward very intentionally, and like we got a mutual understanding that like we're together now. And internships, while they can be paid, they're not always paid. Internships, while they can include mentorship, don't always have mentorship. Internships, while they could offer a lot of related supplemental instruction, sometimes they don't. But you get all of those things with apprenticeship. You get a mentor that's baked into it. It's always a skilled craftsperson that's working with a more junior person. It's always some related supplemental instruction that you're expected. There's a very detailed list of competencies, especially when you're dealing with like what we call big A versus little A apprenticeship. So big A is like registered apprenticeship, where it's either the state or the federal government that has like a list of standards that when a person goes through, this is what they're expected to learn. It's either competency or time based. And like at the end of the program, there's a much greater chance that that person is at that level of proficiency versus like doing a summer internship. So it's just like super different. And because they both end in the word ship, I think people get a little like confused because a lot of folks in the US don't have a great mental model of apprenticeship. Maybe they never knew like a plumber or an electrician, right? They've interacted with a plumber or electrician, but a lot of people that are in like white collar families may never have had any of their kids go through like a blue collar career pathway. So like they're just not familiar with it. It's just not a mental model that a lot of Americans have.
Okay. And I want to come back to specifically what your program does and how you find some of those
Yeah.
companies. But before we do that and get too deep in that, I'm kind of curious what it was that drove you to start this organization and kind of what is the overall. I know it's. Do you have a specific mission with this? How do you know you're being successful in that mission each year?
Yeah. So you were a big part of like my evolution in getting to this point. So I met you many, many years ago, and you had just fresh off the boat here to San Diego. And you were like, I went to a coding boot camp and I want to start my own program. I remember meeting you at a meetup and thinking, this guy's kind of crazy, but good luck. And then
I
slowly
had
but surely,
I had what Aaron Fulkerson used to call
Mhm.
pathological optimism. Is what I
Yeah,
had that night.
yeah. And I could tell you were fired up. And I was like, let me not gas this dude up anymore because I know this is really hard work. And let me try and just like gently let him just kind of like figure this out. I was supportive and I was like, yeah, this is probably the first couple of things that you're going to run into and happy to help. But I got a great job as like a principal software engineer. So I'm not your guy. And it went from that to me showing up and doing like a day in the life talk. And then a little while later, showing up and going to the demo day. And then I was hooked. And I didn't know you were really me in at the time, but I was hooked when I saw just the transformation of these students. And it was scratching an itch that I was trying to kind of do with like the meetups that I was in and the JavaScript community. I was like, man, more people should be able to do this because it's awesome and it's an amazing, company. And they're letting me host meetups in the evening in their office. Like, and then it was in their restaurant space. And, we had all the cool stuff. So I was just like, this is something that I got roped into. And then I was like, okay, when there was a transition, we can talk about the transition later, but there's a transition and I had to decide like, am I going to go back to coding or am I going to keep doing like this like transformational thing for people and helping them get into tech? And so I chose continuing the thing. And then it just became really important for me to one, follow all the rules, two, create some sort of a model where it could be affordable for people and like accessible to as many people as possibly could. So those were like the criteria that I started just kind of like trying to experiment with and figure out. And it was tough because running a code school, it is no joke. Not here in California. at least.
Yeah. Well, I would argue it doesn't even matter where it is, right? Like I always tell people I thought I was
Yeah,
going in that I was going to be some like we're going to need to hire like the Bill Gates of the world that knew everything there was to know about technology and business, and it turned out being more like needing to hire people that were like more like Tony Robbins that could just
100%.
encourage people to just try, just show up and try, and eventually it'll click.
Yeah. And there was a lot less skill that was required back in the day. Like you could take someone with little skill and give them just enough to like spark interest in a senior engineer or an engineering leader that would say, "Oh yeah, we can mentor that person. Like we can bring him in. That's not that risky for us to bring an extra person in." And now it's like, "Oh no, we're not taking any new people. Like we're full on new. We need only senior experienced people." And even they're having a hard time in this, current ecosystem. And it's cyclical, right? We've seen this cycle happen before, so I'm not terribly worried long term for software engineers. Well, at least I'll say no more worried than I am for everyone that's gonna have to compete with AI, right? But I feel like you got a little bit of an advantage if you're more technical and if you master AI than if you're like just oblivious and you have no idea what's going on. But I recently met someone at ASU GSV who runs a coding boot camp. Like he's like his booth was some code school thing. And I was just like, "Hey, are you like running a real code school?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like physically? And he's like, "Yeah." And he was in some place like, I want to say Midwest, like North Dakota or Wisconsin or some, and I was like, well, there you go. Right. But it was interesting that he was like, "Yeah, we're doing really well." And it's one of those more, I would consider more of like a lifestyle size business and not like something that he's looking to scale and go all crazy. But it's interesting. It definitely wasn't like the prototypical Silicon Valley, you know, brand new people that want to transition into tech. It was much more focused on like kind of like the codesmith way of things. Like they got to be a really good student already before they can even like set foot into programs today. Most programs can't survive on just like brand new people. And frankly, like even the early coding boot camps, we always had them do pre-work. Like the 0 to 30 is the hardest part. But if they can come to you with like, "Hey, I went through some free code camp or some, all the different ones we were Team
Yeah.
Treehouse, all the different ones," like it's that first little bit of the ramping that takes a minute, but then it's like you can really skill someone up in a good 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. And just for context, before we used to let them into arcade school, we used to make them do any amount of work. The work didn't even matter. Just like some amount of work that would take at least like 10 hours, maybe even five
Yeah.
hours. It wasn't a lot of hours, but if it's more than 1 hour, then they were had a pretty high success rate once they actually got into the code school. I mean, you could tell it was by the first week, you could always tell. If we could talk about what we learned in education for probably 5 hours. But in terms of like, let's say I'm out there, I don't currently know how to code. What you're saying sounds really good, and I do want to learn how to code, especially in an apprenticeship type role versus internship. What what would I kind of what process would I go through mentally before I applied to a boot camp versus applying to your program, and what would be the key differences?
Oh man, I would say it's much easier to get into a coding boot camp than it is to get into our program in that our opportunity is very limited and it's limited by the capacity of us to provide an actual job and like connect into a company that right now is looking for early career technologists. Right now we have 9 different occupational standards. So everything from like things that are not super technical, but are still in that realm, like digital marketing or technical sales, all the way to the hardest one that's going to be like software development, cloud, cybersecurity. Like they're going to take some effort if you're transitioning into tech. But the thing I tell people is that shouldn't dissuade you from signing up for our pre-apprenticeship program, which is like free. It's like a free coding boot camp. And then because we have thousands of people that sign up for the free program, and we need to have a good volume of people so that when a company comes to us, we can say, "Oh yeah, we have a couple dozen people that are in the state that you're in or in the city that you're in the market where they're looking to hire." And that connection is what makes it possible for us to then bring the person into the apprenticeship. So it's a much more low volume, high quality opportunity. It's not quite as bad as like a lottery ticket, but it's like much, much harder than if you can find someone that will help support you as you go through a coding bootcamp. That's a much more straightforward pathway. And it is going to require a lot more, I don't want to say effort, but it's just going to require a lot more of the pieces that you have to figure out. You got to figure out how you're going to sustain yourself for, I'd say for the first year. I used to tell people, oh, it's going to take about 6 months. Right now, I'd say probably about a year of like learning and then getting some project-based experience and doing a lot of vibe coding. And then eventually an organization might take a chance on you. But it's going to require much more of a portfolio today than it did in years past.
So let's say I am one of those, we'll call them golden ticket winners for sake of argument, and I get
Mhm.
into the apprenticeship, then what does my next year look like?
Oh man. So the beginning portion of it is typically front loaded into training. So it's basically like you're getting paid to go through a coding boot camp. So every day you're getting the same experience you'd get in any kind of immersive program where and that we require you to go through. We do a lot of project based learning. We have daily code challenges. We have forums, which is kind of like a flipped classroom model of learning that takes place throughout the week. So a lot of the things that were kind of evolved over years of us iterating on the traditional code school model, and like I said, just getting paid to just sit down and focus on learning for the first, let's say, 3 months. Then there's usually a transition process where a company will say, okay, we're interested in having the apprentices now work embedded on our team. You embed on a team, you're kind of working hand in hand with more experienced software developers. And then at some point, the company will say, okay, we're going to make a permanent hire and transition to a permanent role at the company. And then you're, in many cases, off of our payroll at that point and onto the payroll of this other company. Sometimes the company sponsors from the very beginning, but it's more common that we might be the employer of record and then transition the person. And when that transition happens, that's when you get that big bump in pay, right? You go from where we can start people at about $25 an hour. The companies are going to start people at like $100,000 a year, $80,000 a year. So people are looking forward to that conversion, even if it means like maybe a few more months of the apprenticeship before your apprenticeship is considered officially over. But we've experienced that before where people are anxious for the certificate, and it's like the certificate doesn't matter. It's the actual job offer that is the light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. So they'll be getting paid once they start the program right away,
Yeah.
is what you're saying?
Yeah. So as soon as they come in, they start getting paid. Like I said, it could be 22, 23, maybe as much as $25 an hour. It's a full-time job, so it's 40 hours a week. We offer PTO, we offer medical, dental, vision, 401k, paid holiday. In some instances, you can bring the dogs in the office. Like we have two nice offices in San Diego. So in theory, you could bring, dogs in the office, all that good stuff. Fortunately, we don't offer, haircuts and massages and any of that stuff yet, but we try and be a really flexible in terms of like pretty much everybody works remote. It's very rare that a student will want to come in and work out of one of the offices, but they can. Like we have two really good size offices, one in Escondido and one in Southeast San Diego. But most of the people will just, work from home. So yeah, imagine how much different it would have been. Like when we first met, you weren't thinking about doing an online coding bootcamp, but um imagine how different it is to wake up every morning knowing that like I'm going to get paid to sit down and learn how to code in my, my nest in my home office, right? Like it's a different experience. And it's not something I would have thought of until we were forced by COVID to do it remote. Because my experience had always been that in person, you get a more focused and productive participant, but we've stayed remote 100%.
That's
So
interesting. Yeah. I mean, we tried a few online tests and we're thinking about going to that online bootcamp model, but just the attendance rates, it's just the hardest thing that anyone's ever done in their life. I think probably the key aspect of what you're describing is when you can go the apprenticeship route and there's a job already lined up at the end and they kind of know that they've like hit the lottery for sake of argument, that the intrinsic motivation is so much higher to be able to make that work versus in the transactional model of the boot camp. It was more like, hey, whether I show up online or not, I paid you and you need to give me a job. And it's like, that's not why people are hiring you. People are going to hire you because of
yeah,
what you're going to learn when you sign on. But it's just too easy to have them not sign on when we did those tests.
yeah. And again, we're in this really weird economy where I wish we could scale this and, help way more individuals. Right now, we happen to get a lot of people that are transitioning service members just because of our location here on the, West Coast with the Marines and the Navy. And we have a skill bridge program that lets people, like, during their last 6 months of active duty, they can start training with us. And so that's really been helpful for us because they're still getting paid by the military during that 6 months. And so it's reduced the cost for us, which has allowed us to expand the number of people that are in that sort of like demographic, right? Where their command has given them permission to, like, for 3 to 4 months to, like, come train with us. And in many cases, as soon as they're done and their last day of service, their next day, like Monday, they've got a job somewhere and they're ready to go. And the ones that don't are like, I want to go to school. So they intentionally decide that, like, they stop their apprenticeship program, go to school, start working on their bachelor's degree. So, like, right now in this weird economy, we'll probably do that for however long this lasts for. And then we'll be back to, I hope, much more youth apprenticeship and apprenticeships that are focused on people that are career changers or going through an apprenticeship degree versus just going directly to college.
Is the bottleneck for the limited amount of students the employers that are willing to go the apprenticeship route?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think you'll notice that I intentionally try not to use the word employer because for most companies, they don't think of themselves as businesses that employ people. They do it as like a need, right? Like, for operating their current business model, they need to have humans. But if they could eliminate humans, in most cases, they definitely would. And so I think about the way that we run this nonprofit as a business that serves businesses. There's got to be some value to them bringing these brand new people into their organization. It's got to improve their bottom line, help them be more productive, help them grow. Like, there's got to be some reason. And then when there is, it makes a ton of sense for them to invest earlier on or invest in developing talent pipelines that otherwise wouldn't exist without their intrinsic demand. And so I think about it like, okay, we got to provide value for folks. And if we don't provide value, then a transaction can't happen. And from my perspective, that limiting factor is always going to be raising companies' awareness so they understand what the ROI is of, like, apprenticeship. It's really high. It's like $1.48 for every dollar that a company puts in. So it makes a ton of sense to invest in this pathway when it works for the business. And then I don't know very many people at all that say that, like, they invested in apprentices and they brought them on and they had like a terrible experience. I always hear like, oh man, I wish we had done this earlier, or I wish we could do more of this. And so it's just like, it really is an awareness thing. If I could have anything, if we could wave a magic wand, I'd say, man, if America could be as aware as, like, the Swiss and the Germans and the UK about modern apprenticeship, man, we'd have so many more opportunities for young people, for people that want to transition. Like, it'd be amazing.
What's your favorite employer success story that's used apprenticeships that was kind of skeptical on the front end, but they now can't get enough for sake of argument on the apprentice side? Do you have a
Oh man.
favorite story on the employer side?
Yeah. So we got a lot of folks jobs at an organization. I won't say they weren't as skeptical on um apprentices. They were skeptical that early career people, that we could get enough up to speed. So it's Todd and Nathan who started New Rocket, which is a small elite ServiceNow partner. And for those people that are in the ServiceNow ecosystem, they know how technically challenging the ServiceNow platform is from an implementation standpoint. It's a lot of work to take someone from no coding experience to being able to code and then inside of that ecosystem where it's like you're dropping JavaScript into a web UI and having to understand if it's talking to the server side or if it's talking to the clients. It's like very fancy. It's fancy stuff. And when I first went to Todd and Nathan, I was like, hey, would this be something that you guys would be interested in doing? They were like, yeah, but I don't know if your folks are going to be able to pick this up fast enough. Like, this is a lot to learn. And so they were quite skeptical at first that they were going to be able to do this. And then it wasn't the first candidate that we sent them, but we sent them a candidate one time. And I just remember Todd was like, yeah, I don't know if we're going to make an offer to this person. And I was like, what's going on? I always send you the best. Like, you got to trust that, like, I'm not going to send you a dud. Like, this guy's going to be good. He's like, yeah, but he didn't present very well. And when we interviewed him, it was like kind of cluttered in the background. And it was like, no, you don't understand. Like, you got a bad read. This guy's really good. Like, he's going to be a superstar. And then he was like, all right, I guess we'll give it a try. Right. So he brings him in as an apprentice. And this, again, is just an apprentice. So it's just a test drive. This wasn't even like, this was a contract to hire. we were the employer of record. So his apprenticeship was with us. And we were just sort of like going to do a contract to hire and
Is
then let
that
them convert them.
is that how it normally works? Is you're the employer of record for those apprenticeships, so there would
Early on
be
it was.
low risk for the employer?
Yeah, early on it was. When we were able to do that, like it was kind of like the second model that we tested out. And so that model was like pretty easy to get companies to at least try, because at any point they could just cancel the contract, or they could say, hey, we want to swap out the apprentice. So it did make it a little bit easier. Again, it was still, for the apprentice, there was a lot of security because like they were guaranteed a job, even if it was on our bench. But for the company, they were just like, all right, we'll try them out. This guy comes in, crushes it, and then they came back and hired like subsequent waves of like over and over and over again. And so it took us a little while to get to that point, because candidly, because it is harder, we couldn't get candidates ready to go to them, because by the time we got them not even close, we got them done with the web development stuff, another company would take them and be like, oh yeah, like they're ready to go. So it took us a while of like moving our curriculum around, getting them ready for a ServiceNow position, and then getting those first few people over there to New Rocket before they were just like, oh yeah, like as soon as you have the next person ready, like we're good to go. We need to absorb this person onto our team, and then we're ready to like re-up and like do this again. And they were doing it in small batches, like two at a time, two at a time. And that's what I recommend. You know, we've seen success with that in the past with other small startups. And man, I will never forget the fact that they were about to sleep on this person just because, like, again, they got a bad read during an interview. And it just goes to show that, like, we have a much deeper relationship with the candidates because we've already hired them. I'm not going to pass you off a dud. I'm going to pass you off someone that you're going to love, because it's going to build our relationship over time. I'm not going to try and, sabotage your business by giving you someone that's terrible just to get them off of our books.
Well,
That would not be good.
also you have a
That'd be
thousand people to
terrible.
choose from when by the time you even get to go choose the
Yeah.
candidates.
Yeah. So overall, it's when you build that relationship with an employer that just gets it and understands like the reasons why they're doing this, it's amazing. There are folks that they're not leveraging the pattern the way that I would. And they might open up an apprenticeship program, they might get 700, 7,000 candidates, and then they're picking people that have like already gone through a boot camp, or they've already, and it's like, I want to focus on people that haven't had a shot yet. Like this is their shot. And like the thing that I can do that's different than the employer is like, we can see the passion. We can see someone that like, this person is going to crush it and be there that whole journey, right? To make the investment and then be there until they get across the finish line.
And I want to touch on that for people who you said who didn't get that shot. I know part of your mission is helping underrepresented people break into technology. What does that mean to you, and why is that so important to you personally?
Well, I feel like for me, at least, I remember being in a situation where, because there's not a lot of Black people here in San Diego, we're only like 5% of the population of San Diego, but we're even a smaller population inside of like technology, inside of, let's say, software engineering in particular. There's overrepresentation in like very entry level tech positions like desktop support. And so I was just like, man, I don't want people to get trapped in like desktop support, get stuck there and not be able to move on to an engineering team. There's got to be a way that I can help people get the skills they need to be really attractive to employers. And then I don't have to be the only one in the room. I remember there was one time where you came back from a conference that you were at, and you were like, I didn't know, but it was like a women's conference, and you
Oh
felt
yeah,
like you were
yeah, I remember that.
right.
Oh my goodness, I forget the name of the organization, but it was an organization for successful women in the business. But our PR guy had signed me up to it, or nominated me, or somebody did, and so it was me. I was the only man in the entire room for for these women's awards. I was up for an award for a Women's Educator of the Year award.
Tell me that you didn't win an award. That would have been
No,
so
I didn't even go to and it was like the
okay.
pre meet that I went to, and I was like, like this is not appropriate. So
I'll say that.
nobody talked to me there. So
Yeah, I'll say that like for a lot of folks, and this may be the case for you, it may be the case for the person that's listening to this podcast. They don't have that daily experience of being like the only one in the room. And I feel like for people at some point in your life when you've been the only person in the room and that you don't have a chance to adapt to it. It's something that just happens to you and it's like kind of surprising. But like you eventually adapt to it when you're, black or you're an immigrant or you're a woman, right? Like, but I don't think we should normalize that and like just adapt to it and just put up with the fact that like the room is always going to look like I'm the only one in the room. If you feel like there should be more because it's representative of the population, as an example, like I don't think everything should be just like a gross quota. Like we have to have exactly this percentage of people. But I feel like when it's imbalanced, it feels really weird to me. Like it feels really weird to be in like a room of CTOs and they're all gray bearded white dudes. And I'm just like, there's no women that are CTOs. There's no black CTOs. Like it's just weird. And to me, that weirdness, like I want to at least try and fix it or address it and not just like pretend it doesn't exist and we're just going to talk about technology. And it's like, come on, like you all don't notice that this room doesn't look like it looks outside of this room. And so for me, I just felt the responsibility. I felt like I got to a point in my career where I'd done it for a really long time. And like, there was no reason to not at least challenge that the room doesn't have to look like this. It could look more like it looks when you go after work to the bar and you're hanging out with your friends. Right. And yeah, like once you think that thought, it's hard to not think it. It's hard to not to walk in the room and not see it that way. And then when people come up to me, like in a meetup, and they're just like, hey, and they'll use another name and they'll call me somebody else. And I'm like, yeah, you don't know me. I'm the other black guy in the community that you're thinking I'm somebody else. Like that can only happen so many times before you're just like, okay, we need more black people so that you guys can tell us apart because this is not cool.
Honestly, we think the time there's some study that had come out. I mean, this was like 2016, 2015, sometime in that range. But it was some study that was like, if you're a really greedy CEO and all you care about is money, then you'll actually have a diverse team because your user base is
100%.
going to be diverse. And so that was the biggest thing, was like the greediest thing you can do is have a diverse team and make your developers and product managers the same backgrounds as your users, essentially.
Yeah. But it'll take work, right? Because it's like you're not going to be able to fish from the same fishing hole as everybody else in terms of like where you go to find software engineers. If you go to UCSD's demographic is not representative of like San Diego, right? And so like traditionally, a lot of the tech organizations are like, they're kind of elitist, right? They're going to the big R1 institutions. They want to hire from like Stanford, MIT, UCSD. But even though it's like the right thing to do financially, it does require work. It does require effort that some folks would rather not put the effort in, and they just don't see the value. They have maybe like a personal political belief that's just like, oh, DEI is pretty hot topic right now. We don't need to go down that pathway, but just the idea that like that just the language and the words around that um are just like so disconnected from the reality and what makes money and like what helps your business grow. And it's just like, all right, I'm over here when this whole thing settles down and we can figure out, the best path to move forward. But until then, I'll use all the right words and avoid letters and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in today's world, there's a lot of like acronyms, and people who have not been involved in the trenches think a lot of things that they read or see or hear from other people. It definitely changed a lot when we were every day, like in the code school, helping people that like, regardless of their race, were living in their parents' garage. They couldn't afford to get engaged. They were stocking shelves at Petco and had like $100,000 in debt from like USC or something, but they couldn't get a job,
Yeah.
right? Like, what are, and kind of on the same wavelength, what are like one or two stories of like your students that they don't have to, I won't call them your favorite stories because I know that I had like 30 favorite stories back in the day at
Oh yeah.
my code school, but like, what are some of the notable ones? Like one or two of those, just out of curiosity on the student side.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the ones that stands out to me is I remember when I was way in the back of our like the best office we had, which was like top of the Diamond View building. And so my office was like way off the floor. And I remember this, confident guy walks in one day and I'm chatting him up and he's a PhD in computer science, right? And so he's grilling me on like, is this school the real deal, right? Or is this some kind of a con or scam? Because he's asking me, because he's looking out for his buddy. His buddy's name is Ashmai. And so Yashmai is a Navy vet. He's just got out of the military, interested in joining the program, but he asked his buddy to like make sure that we're legit before he signs up and pays all this money. So, he's asking me tough questions. Finally, we get Yashmai on board and he's diving into the curriculum. And then we had a little bit of left curve there at the school. And I lost track of him for a while. I had no idea what Yashmai was up to, what he was headed into. And a couple months later, I'm walking around. It's in the afternoon, evening, and I see him on the street. And I'm just like, oh, hey, Yashmai. We stop. And he explains he's still hustling. He's still working at a moving company. He's working at an insurance company. And he's building some websites, WordPress and whatnot, but he's not coding, right? And so I was so disappointed because I was just like, man, I know this guy's potential and that he just a hustler working super hard, very genuinely nice dude, like a really nice guy. You remember Yashmai, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so I encourage him to come to my new program. I'm like, hey, I got an apprenticeship program. So he comes on board as an apprentice. Now he's getting paid. He's coding every day and he just takes off like a rocket ship, right? And he ends up getting placed after he goes through the curriculum. He gets placed at BD, Beck& Dickinson. So for those that are listening, that's a big medical devices company, a Fortune 500. He's on a QA team. And he's doing some writing tests and stuff, C# QA stuff. Not the funnest stuff to do, but it's a huge company, great opportunity. And then fast forward till today, he's part of our leadership team. He took a job with us and eventually he was a teacher for a while in the classroom. And then now he's out doing client engagement and supporting our SkillBridge program. So he's got a whole portfolio that he's managing. And then he's now going out and recruiting people to come be in our program and go through the apprenticeship program. So it's like full circle from somebody trying to like gatekeep and like keep him from making a mistake to like bringing people in and offering them life-changing experiences. And you don't get any better of an advocate than a person who has been the most skeptical person of this whole thing, right? And so that one stands out as like one of my like favorite like turnarounds. I guess the only other one that is similar to that is I remember when I first started San Diego Code School, I had this guy send me an email. And then the email, he was like super skeptical. He was just like, this can't be real. Like, you guys can't be doing this. And then fast forward and went through our program. And when he finished, it was like right when COVID hit. And so we brought him in as an apprentice and he was like, I can't thank you enough for having the opportunity to like get me off of planes. I can't tell you how crazy it is to be on planes right now with people during COVID. And he's like, I never want to go back to doing that ever. And he's somebody we got into a new rocket. He spent a couple of years there. And then he wanted to do more hands-on coding in React. So he took a job working at, I want to say he was at Trust and Will. I think he was at Trust and Will.
Okay.
And he was just like so grateful. And I always bring up to him, remember that like email that you wrote me that you were like, this is a scam. I don't believe you. Yeah. How about now? You believe me now? Dude, it's the best ever. Because his email was just like so snarky and like somebody told me to reach out to you guys, but I don't think this is true. And I'm just like, all right, bro, hold my beer. Let me explain to you what's going on here. And like I fired back a response to him like, you're not going to call me a scammer. It's like, oh man.
I will ask you this
Yeah.
because this is a question, and this is super interesting because I think it was like 2014, let's call it, when I started the code school originally. And the number one question that every applicant asked in 2014 and 15 was, do I even need to learn how to code because AI is coming and it's probably going to take my job? So we're now here 10 years later. It hasn't taken jobs. It's made people more efficient. Maybe it's taken some of the additional hires off the table. But what are your thoughts when you hear people? I'm sure people ask you all the time, like, should I even learn how to code anymore? Because AI is here and it's going to do all the coding for us in the future. So I'm curious what your response is to that when people ask you, because I know it comes up a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, I was at a workforce board meeting and I stood up to make a public comment at the board meeting. And one of the first responses from one of the board members was, yeah, but I thought like coding was going to go away. And I was just like, oh my God, it's gotten to our workforce boards. So my take on it is this: if you have ever written software for any length of time, you would know just how terrible of an idea it is to let the current AI try and like just write all the code, right? All the vibe coding nonsense. While it's possible for you to write and create small applications, it's going to be very challenging for you to build anything that's like scales up and needs like a lot of like context for the AI to be able to like code alongside of you. One of the things that's like really challenging with coding is even though it can do like it can solve very difficult code challenges, so just a small amount of code to solve a very specific problem, it can like blows through that. That's easy. But software development is really not so much about writing the actual code, but it's much more about talking to human beings and trying to understand what the real problem is they're trying to solve, and then how you actually go about solving it with all of the diverse little integrations and like this person's system needs this and this other system needs that. And so it's a lot of this interconnected problem solving and destructuring that AI is like not even close to doing, let alone the fact that like I mean, I'm sure you've done some time as a software engineer. You see all the different hands inside of a project, and you can tell, oh, this is the signature of this person because their coding style is terrible and they can't, everything is hard to understand. And like,
That was
that's
typically
just
my
when a
code,
human is writing
right?
it.
That was my code.
Yeah, sure. And so even my code, like the code that you write on Friday, you look at it again on Monday and you're like, what was I thinking when I wrote this? I can't understand any of this. Imagine what it's going to be like when you have to try and understand why a machine wrote code in a certain way and starts to optimize it towards. So there's all these crazy scenarios that I think of as a software engineer that I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense. So I think it's hard for people that have never written software to understand the perspective of people that do this every day and realize like most of the time I spend as an engineer is like reading other people's code, providing feedback on other people's code, talking to people to understand what do they really actually need and what's the minimum amount of effort that we can do to like surprise and delight them with a solution. And it's not about like the actual entering things into an IDE, right? And like writing actual code. And so it can certainly help with that portion, but there's all these other portions that human beings are going to do. Now, AI is getting really good. Like there are tools out there that do an amazing job of like creating artwork and understanding how to break a big problem down and like all of those pieces. And while it's true that eventually all those things will fold in, by the time software engineers lose their job, everyone else is going to be out of work. So like the safest bet is still to like bet on engaging and moving into IT careers if it's something you're interested in, knowing that like cybersecurity, cloud, on premises, a lot of people bring servers back on premises. There's a lot of roles that are going to require human beings for a really long time. I mean, I was at my first conference where I saw one of those little Boston Dynamic robot
Yeah,
dogs
that's cool.
a week ago, and I was just like, man, it's like amazing to see that in person. When you see humanoid robots that are like walking around on TV, I haven't seen any in person, but like I went to Vegas, I went to the Sphere, like I want to say just a year ago, and saw like, they have you been to the Sphere?
Uh-uh.
Okay, so inside they have this like AI thing in the lobby area that is from maybe like the waist up. It's a robot, and the robot will like talk and engage with people in the crowd, be like, hey, little girl over there with the blue shirt on, how are you? Do you have a question for me? And you can interact with it. That was a year ago. Now they've got robots that are untethered, walking around, like carrying boxes, right? So anybody that thinks that jobs are safe is like kind of naive. But I tend to think that people that understand software engineering are going to be more resilient because at the end of the day, you still understand like computational thinking, how you destructure, how you general algorithms and how you break a problem down into like a solvable, a scientific method of trying to get to a solution, debugging, all of those kinds of things. So I'm not worried. I'm not worried in the least bit about that, about it taking our jobs. I'm worried about like 30% unemployment and how do we as a, world start dealing with like an abundance. I feel like we're close to having an abundance of like a lot of technology, a lot of food, a lot of energy. And like, what's the next fight? Because we're going to fight over something. So like, what's the next fight going to be? And like, how can we just like figure out as humans how to help each other and, work together and all those kinds of things. But I'm not worried about my job. Never.
So if I like it, what happens to the economy? That's a separate podcast. It's outside
Yeah,
our
for
scope.
sure.
So let's say I'm a senior engineer and stuck in a boring corporate job. I want to help apprentices learn how to code, or I just want to help your organization outside of giving money. Is there anything I can do to help your organization in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely. We're always interested in time, talent, and of course, treasure. So like I have nothing against if people want to actually financially support us, but just giving an apprentice an hour of your time per month, that's what we ask mentors to commit to, makes a huge difference because these folks mostly have all the technical answers and they go to ChatGPT and they can look stuff up. But it's really being able to like talk to someone and get that comfort of knowing that like, okay, I'm doing the right thing, I'm making progress, and like get the sense that I'm not, because they all always, I mean, you remember this, they always think that they're behind everybody else. They always think that like, I'm not as smart as everybody else in the class, right? And there's all these thoughts that go through their brain, and they just need a almost like a daily affirmation that like you're smart, you're good enough, you can do this. And a person that comes from the industry that can just say, I was once in your shoes, and I know you probably don't believe this when your instructors tell you this, but you're doing fine and you're where you need to be, and you just need to keep moving forward and get 1% better every day, and you're going to be fine. Just that, just having that pick me up once a month could make a huge difference in the trajectory of a person's life because they'll believe in it and they'll keep going. And we know if they just keep going, they're gonna good stuff is gonna happen.
It's it's crazy. If you have the ability to give your time to help some of these students, I cannot tell you how much of an ROI you'll get on that in your personal life. Like, so I personally sat with probably, I don't know, 250, 300 students sitting with them that are stuck on any given day or in their job hunt. It's when it gets really tough too. And so I sat through that for several years. And then at the end of it, I actually went through the curriculum and learned how to code and then had to go get my own coding job. There were days when I was going through that having seen 300 cases of people feeling insecure, I still felt insecure and would call you and be like, I'm never going to get this. Literally
100%.
saying the exact same things they would say to me, having the knowledge that I knew what was happening intellectually, but like mentally, it still gets to you on those tough days. So, like, if you can be that person for someone, I can tell you that even if they know it's coming, there's something about just calling somebody on that particular day and be like, I'm screwed. I wasn't meant to code. I should just go do XYZ. That's easier. It's more familiar. They just need somebody to say, it's going to be okay. This is normal. Just show up again tomorrow, the next day, and call me at the end of the week. And then it always gets better. So if I'd always felt like, man, if that even happened to me with the experience I had before it happened to me, that it feels like it'll happen to everybody, right? You just can't avoid it
Yeah.
if you're a human.
And it's something innate about going fast, right? So this is not I'm going through a 4-year program. This is like rapid. And so everything is coming at you super fast. You're drinking from a fire hose. And so it can easily feel overwhelming when someone's trying to do something this hard, this quickly. But like you said, just having as many people as possible, we try and pair each person up with as many as three, and these are bonds that oftentimes they'll last career, right? People will say, oh yeah, like I still mentor or still talk to this person, still keep in touch with someone that like I met through your program many years ago. For the other benefit, I would say for people that maybe aren't super seasoned and maybe you've been just in tech for a while, don't even necessarily need to be a software engineer, you could be just in a tech adjacent role, is the idea that it's a great way for you to level up your cultural competency, your leadership skills, to like have a chance to spend an hour just exercising some of those muscles. And like it's a safe environment, it's just a one-on-one situation, and it will give you the confidence that you might need to like help move you further along in your career if you're looking for more like leadership or you're looking to like get better at the skill of working with other people. So there's intrinsic benefits for individuals as well as what you give back to other folks.
Do you guys have any like annual fundraising events, like any dinners or golf tournaments or anything that you guys do? Any hackathons or anything? Just out of curiosity.
We're planning to do our first event this year. We've been talking about it for a while. We even have this wild idea of doing a cruise at some point, which I think,
Sick.
but
I
I
was
think,
about to be like, dude, why don't you at least have a golf tournament so I can come to San Diego? But I hope
I know
a cruise does sound better.
cruise sounds really nice. So we got to work through the logistics on that because that requires like a lot of planning.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to start doing events. We actually just hired a major gift officer, and that's one of the things that came from her background is she did lots of events. And so this year probably be the first time. It's interesting because like for our growth, for most of our growth, I started this and I don't have a lot of money. So it wasn't like we came to the game with like a few $1,000,000 to start this. I remember hearing that like there's a city in, I don't want to say the city, but there's a city in California that started doing apprenticeships and they started with $3 million in their pocket, like ready to go. We started with zero. We started with, let's do some projects and see if we can earn enough to start hiring some people. And it was like, we do a project, we hire some people. We do a project, we hire some people. And so we still are just like, we are an infant in the world of like nonprofits where usually you start getting like major legacy big gifts at like 6, 8, 10 years in. And for us, something that I'm really proud of is that most of our revenue comes from fee-based services to big corporate clients, people that like they need the work that we're doing. So like we haven't had to rely on philanthropy, but that said, we don't have that muscle yet. And I think events could be a fun way for us to like start building out that arm of how we support the organization. So if anybody's listening to this and they have ideas about a golf tournament or they want to sponsor something, like I would be more than happy to have conversations around like how can we do fun things, fun events. And we'll get to the cruise eventually.
Perfect. Anyone on our email list, we'll let them know when the cruise or golf tournament happens.
Yeah.
Is there anything about creating coding careers that we did not talk about that you do want to mention?
Oh man. I mean, I could talk about apprenticeships forever. I think from one of the things that I think we touched on in the beginning of the conversation that I really, again, want to encourage people to think differently about apprenticeships, not necessarily being an alternative to college, but instead it could be a pathway that people could go to and still earn a degree. So one of the things that we're doing is starting to work with higher ed institutions. We have the first one's already on board. That's Foothill College in San Jose, California, Bay Area. And we're working to design pathways where while they're going through the apprenticeship program, they're also earning college credit. So for companies that are thinking about like, how can I upskill my people? The idea of having apprenticeship degrees happening here in the US is something that I'm super bullish on. And I feel like it doesn't have to be, you don't have to think about this as like you either go down this college pathway or you go down this like vocational working on the job type pathway. We can do big things. We can walk and chew bubblegum. And I want that for everybody. I think everybody's kid should have the ability to take some career technical education in high school, maybe do some dual enrollment, get some college credit, be able to work through an apprenticeship if they want to, and be able to earn a job or earn a degree on the job. And that should be something that much more of our population does. Because only like a quarter of our population has a bachelor's degree by 25. That's crazy to me. It's crazy to
Honestly,
me.
even if you go monetarily as a form of success, which you shouldn't, but if you did, then my most successful friends, none of them even went to college. They all learned how to code. And then out of high
Yeah.
school, got their first coding job.
And the thing that I think people forget is like coding is also something that like you get to exercise muscles and build in such a way that you become phenomenal at being like a CTO or being a product person or like being an entrepreneur. And so it's like one of those like transferable skills, like software engineering and building product is one of those skills that like super transferable. And you're not going to be like a code monkey for more than like 5 to 10 years before you're going to have opportunities to do a bunch of other things if you do it well, like if you actually work at it. I know tons of people that like, I remember Aaron, the guy I was working with at Zito, who's like, he was like a fitness guy, right? He's like, CrossFit, all that kind of stuff. And now he like runs a food company where he like makes custom diets for people. And he went from software engineer, which he was really good at, to like entrepreneur running his own business that's like not very tech. And
It's because it's all that,
software engineering,
it's that problem solving muscle, right? It's just once you can
100%.
solve problems and diagnose those problems and fix them, and it's the organization required, I feel like, to be like the documentation you need for code and the more notes you leave. If you leave notes, you're going to be able to run a business. So profitable.
100%. So it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like even if for whatever chance I've given people bad advice about like technology and the AI is actually going to clobber us all, I think we'll still be okay. Like we're gonna be fine. We're gonna have transferable skills. We'll be able to figure out like what the thing to do is, and yeah, again, still not worried.
Fix the
100%. It ain't gonna be the robot.
no, not for a while. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and thanks for spending some time. The thing that I do want to make sure and include is the link, the pre-work for the link that anybody
Yeah,
can access. So my understanding is anybody can access it for free. And even the biggest thing too is seeing them to make sure you're even interested in coding. And I always felt like that was a good use of pre-work. Like if you're not sure if you want to learn how to code, whether you go to boot camp, whether you end up going to creating coding careers, you need to make sure you're going to like it first, because a lot of people got into the for the income levels, but didn't love the problem solving aspects, didn't make it. So I'll include that link in the show notes as well.
yeah, 100%. And again, it's called the pre-apprenticeship. Everybody's got to go through it, and that's where we find candidates for the apprenticeship. So if you want to punch yourself a lottery ticket, jump in the pre-apprenticeship, and like to your point, you're going to discover if you really love it, and if you do, there's probably a chance that like you go through the pre-apprenticeship, then you grab my book, and then once you do that, you're good.
How do they get your book?
That's on Amazon.
Okay.
Hacking the Bootcamp.
Oh, we're definitely
Yeah,
putting that
for
on there.
sure. I mean, like I said, it's not the easy path, but you go through the pre-apprenticeship. You could then build projects. You could do some vibe coding, go a little deeper, right? Build some good stuff, and then use the tactics in the book, which is like everything that I've seen work for students over to like the last decade or so. And like, it's definitely doable for those people that really want to be in AI, really want to be in cybersecurity. Like it's all there. All the pieces are there, but it's hard.
Awesome.
If it were easy, everybody would be doing it and nobody would be making any money though. So like, you gotta find the trade-off.
It's definitely worth it. We definitely have a track record of that being the case. All right. I appreciate you hopping on. Thanks for coming on today, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.